Let's talk about this because we were going to talk about the Saudis last week because, of course, President Obama traveled to Saudi Arabia upon the death of the king. I can't even remember his name now.
Abdullah. I don't know. There's so many, and there's so much to remember there.
Well, I mean, the bottom line is that the secession of is not exactly constitutional. Let's put it that way in Saudi Arabia. And
I don't know that we would call anything about Saudi Arabia in general constitutional.
I mean, and here's, I'm going to just start with this. I mean, because obviously there's the big story this week was that Zacarias Moussaoui, this was the member of Al-Qaeda who was apprehended and arrested prior to the 9/11 attacks.
He had this strange interest in Minneapolis or the Minnesota area in just wanting to learn how to steer airplanes, but not actually take them into the air or land them.
But let me say the overall we have heard the biggest excuse for things like fracking in this country and even Keystone, as ridiculous as that is this notion of energy independence. And we get about, I think, somewhere around 10 to 15% of our oil from Saudi Arabia. But the bottom line is our strategic interest in Saudi Arabia is not simply for the oil that we get there.
That's right.
It is because we want to have the ability to control the spigot of oil that the rest of the world gets. That's the bottom line. That's why we were in Iraq, as far as I'm concerned, not to get cheap oil, but to make sure that we had the ability to make oil very expensive, if necessary, for the rest of the country, of the rest of the world in some future, vision quest that Dick Cheney has, or some apocalyptic vision that Dick Cheney has. That's basically, in my estimation.
Yeah. By the way, Vision Quest, a good movie. I just thought I'd throw that out there. You know what? I think it goes even further than that, Sam. I think that is 100% true. But if it would behoove everyone, if you have time and interest, to stand and read sort of the history of how the Saud family came together with al-Wahhab and Wahhabism, and basically did, in a manner of speaking, what many others have done in the past, where you combine religious fervor with the economic interests of an elite. See the Republican Party here, right? And the religion is a way of controlling the masses and keeping people in line. And it allows, a monarchy of sorts. It allows economic royalists to set up and justify their economic actions using religious, using theocracy. And the truth is that it's not like it's just these guys who did this. The Ottomans beat them up for a while and stopped them, but they came kind of back in the 1920s, back into forming this alliance. And in the end, the truth of the matter is that we have supported them for a variety of reasons. So have the British and others, because what they've done, we've overlooked this sort of exporting Wahhabism, and we've overlooked these things because they've kept the region, in a manner of speaking, the way we want it. They've kept others divided and fighting each other there. It's also been a base where we can conduct operations from. But our fear is of a united Islam. And the Wahhabist sect won't. Basically, ISIS is just a sort of slightly crazier offshoot. It's not that far off. I mean, to Wahhabists, if you're a Shiite, you need to be killed. You're a non-believer, and that includes whatever happens to your family. I mean, it's sickening stuff, and it makes you start to understand why some of these guys in ISIS and Al Qaeda do what they do. So I just think when you know that the connection we have to going to them way back. I mean, I don't want to sound too conspiratorial here, but this is really, plain out in front of your face, common sense. I mean, Craig Unger wrote that book, House of Bush, House of Saud, that laid out a lot of this kind of stuff. I mean, the Bush family was in the CIA. I mean, George Bush Sr. and had these, these types of connections in oil and national security. And so in a manner of speaking, these guys who are committing these kinds of, or supporting, these kinds of terrorism against us, we overlook a lot of what they do because oil is a big part of it. And as you said, we control the world's oil, but it gives us a staging area. And we know that what they're doing, we looked at them as the ones who were most likely to stop, Nasserism, to stop Baathism, to stop the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. We've used them for a whole number of things. And we've chosen to overlook the fact that it is as close to fascism as I think you can come today. And, we pay the price here and there for that. And I'm sorry, Bob Graham and others have talked about the 28 pages that are redacted. But there are real stories there. There are Saudi families that were taken out of the country, right after 9/11. We were never really told why and what the situation was. We know.
Let me just reiterate what you just said, because I'm not sure that everybody's aware of what you were referencing. Former Senator Bob Graham, who sat on the 9/11 Commission, has been loudly complaining for years about this relationship, and specifically about 28 pages that were redacted from that report that he wants released that purport to show, at least the speculation is, that about the Saudi connection. And I just want to say, before we go into specific the Moussaoui charges, that the idea of dividing the Arab world, as it were, by supporting Wahhabists, and at one point I think the Saudis may have been sending some weapons to ISIS even. To create these fissures is not only a fairly obvious thing to do. I mean, people can go back and look at how the Israelis promoted Hamas in the same way so that they could diminish the power of the Fatah. And this was, 20, 25 years ago now.
Right.
And it's all documented. I mean, I think the Wall Street Journal did a piece on it, frankly. I mean, so this has been a long-term strategy. People at the time, I think, in Israel were saying, this may not be such a good idea because we could be growing something that could be a little bit more virulent than we anticipate. And I think that's what happened, frankly, with some of what's going on with ISIS.
Sure. Remember the role that Saudi Arabia also Israel played in terms of getting arms in the Iran hostage in the the arms crisis when we sent arms over to Iran. All right, that's some of the guys behind the scenes. Remember that 15 of 19 of these hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. I mean, there's just so they're always close to what's going on, and they're always playing that role because they've been a bulwark against Iran and Hezbollah, and against, again, we looked at them as, and some of these things have been declassified now, as best able to help fight off the Soviets. And so to think, that it isn't, we haven't had a huge interest there, and that we haven't tried to exploit divisions by using them and realizing that really the most divisive thing there could be Wahhabism, even if, there's collateral damage in the form of all sorts of dead civilians, people who are being, obviously hung in the streets and beheaded, and this goes on in Saudi Arabia. Clearly ISIS takes it to a whole different level, but it's some of the same. There's somewhat of an offshoot. It's somewhat different, but it's some of the same kind of motivation and some of the same kind of theocratic underpinnings that Saudi Arabia had. It's sort of that there is one mosque and there is one leader, and ISIS now just doesn't see the Saudi Arabian royals as being that legitimate leader. They think it should be them. But it's the same thing. And anybody else who doesn't follow this radical form of religion is an infidel. And it's justified that you can do whatever you want to them, including killing and raping their wives and killing their kids. And so when you see this vicious savagery coming from the likes of them and Boko Haram and others, this shouldn't be completely shocking.
Right. And so Moussaoui here claims apparently wrote to a U.S. district court judge in providing essentially testimony in a case that has been in the works for almost a dozen years, maybe more actually, a lawsuit against Saudi Arabia for by relatives of those killed on 9/11, claims that he was directed in 1998 or 99 by al-Qaeda leaders in Afghanistan to create a digital database of donors to the group. Among those, he said, recalled listing in the database were Prince Turki Al Faisal, who was then the Saudi intelligence chief, Prince Bandar bin Sultan, this is the longtime Saudi ambassador to the United States, Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, a prominent billionaire investor, and many of the other country's leading clerics. Now, we've known, it has been fairly well known that that support for al-Qaeda came from Saudi Arabia, but the argument has always been, well, it's not been the leadership. It's been some like distant relatives, Saudi cousins who are just sort of like the jerks of the family at
the black sheep.
Yeah, exactly. Those guys, they got a ton of cash because you can never control those guys. But they're the ones who usually listen to jazz and are down in the basement peeling potatoes, to use the example I've used in the past of those dynamics. And so, but this basically, the claim here is that that no, this is from the top leadership. And Graham, in this case, has written, I'm convinced there was a direct line between at least some of the terrorists who carried out September 11th attacks and the government of Saudi Arabia. And Bob Kerrey said in an affidavit that it was fundamentally inaccurate and misleading to argue, as lawyers for Saudi Arabia have, that the 9/11 Commission exonerated the Saudi government. And so, it really does make you wonder. Look.
Let's say this quickly, too, because this is important testimony dealing with the lawsuit by 9/11 families against Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, that's what this is.
Right. So I'm saying this is an important part of that, but just, to tie the knot a little bit more here, I'm not sure if he still is, but who for a while, of course, was the defense lawyers for Saudi Arabia, was James Baker. What interest does he have in protecting them and whatever secrets may come out? I'm just saying, again, it's not hard to connect the dots.
James Baker being the consigliere, basically, for the Bush family dynasty.
The consigliere for the Bush family just about forever, former Secretary of State. I mean, he has an interest well beyond financial in making sure these guys, the extent of the Bush family and others' relationship with these guys, in power, out of power, not to, they're members of the Bin Laden family were in the Carlyle group. Right, with Bush Senior, this private equity group that is international in scope. I'm just saying that there's a lot more here, and that's why it's interesting that you don't see anyone. Most of these guys in the mainstream media won't touch this thing right now.
And the other issue too is that, like, look, it also, the interesting thing here is, this is what I get so frustrated about sort of the what are considered to be 9/11 truther conspiracies, is that all these conspiracies, you don't really need those explanations to be able to say that, like, look, clearly this type of terrorism is not a genuine concern, or I should say, stamping out this type of terrorism is not a genuine concern for at least some elements of the United States sort of elite, because it provides a great context to exercise its hegemony. And those people don't need to do anything other than just allow their buddies in Saudi Arabia to continue to at least provide some measure of fuel for this fire. So you don't need to do anything else. That's all you need to do.
Yes. No, that's exactly right. And so, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see where this goes. But
I know where it's going to go. It's going to go nowhere, I think. It seems, I don't know.
I hope you're wrong. I suspect you're right. He has said something important here. People at least are trying to cover this. I'm hoping more will. It's out there, But again, there's a lot of forces aligned on the other side to make sure those 28 pages don't come out, to make sure the things that Graham and Bob Kerrey are talking about don't become widespread, don't become known, and don't think that the Bush family, particularly with Jebby running for president, not that they don't have an interest in general in this stuff never coming out, but now, of course, that's even increased.
Yeah.
So, We'll see.
People forget that Jeb was one of the original signers on the Project for a New American Century, the sort of ground zero of the neocon movement. There's probably some family responsibilities that they're contemplating.
Yeah, I'll throw out one fun fact too, also about James Baker's law firm Baker Botts, is that they have 3 offices. Their 3 offices are in Houston, Washington D.C., and Riyadh. So you take that for what it's worth. I'm sure they don't get too much business from that.